Okay, as the time is now at 4 o'clock, allow me to welcome you all to the Institute of International Relations, and specifically to an event that's being facilitated by the newly established Centre for European Security at the Institute of International Relations. My name is Benjamin Tallis, I'm the coordinator of the Centre for European Security, and today we have the pleasure of welcoming two very distinguished guests from Russia, Dr. Irina Kobrinskaya and Dr. Boris Frunkin, who are going to be discussing the latest edition of the IMEMO annual Russia and the World publication, which is a forecast publication that looks at the potential for different relations of Russia to other countries, to economic situations and so on in the coming year. The purpose of this discussion today is to quote a popular phrase from Twitter, retweet does not equal endorsement. We are not here to actually endorse the findings of the IMEMO report, but rather to use this as a platform from which to provoke further discussion between scholars and policy practitioners within the European Union, but also in Russia, and discussion between them. So, to that effect, not only are we presenting, or we have this presentation of the report today, but the English-language journal of the Institute, Perspectives, in what is going to be its final issue before it transforms into New Perspectives, will be publishing an English-language abridged version of this report. So you'll be able to find that in the issue that will be released in the next few weeks. For Russian speakers, the full text is available from IMEMO upon request, and is available online as well?
Yes, it is on the
It's available
website.
online, so you can find the text there. A couple of points about today. First of all, we're going to start off with a presentation from Irina, who is going to introduce some of the main themes of the report, which, as I mentioned, touch on geopolitics, on what is called somewhere, in some places, political economy. In other places, that's a term that's somewhat still frowned upon. However, we hope to be able to revive that and show what we mean by that. But also to talk about foreign policy positioning of Russia. Clearly, this is a particularly sensitive and important issue at this time, which is exactly why we hope to encourage this dialogue. In keeping with the focus on dialogue, the presentation itself will be short. From Irina, then Boris will probably add some points as well, and then we are going to open for questions and comments. There is plenty to question and plenty to comment on. Not everything is clearly going to be presented in a 10-minute presentation, so feel free to try to clarify or so on. And then to actually take up the content of the report with two of the authors who are part of the collective that actually authored this paper. I would say very clearly, though, from the outset, today's meeting is not the forum to discuss the particular details of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, partly because neither Boris nor Irina, this is not their speciality. The report is much more concerned with underlying causes and potential longer-term consequences of contingencies, causes and effects. So if we can keep our discussion to that rather than focusing on particular details of what may or may not be happening in certain parts of Ukraine, that will be a more productive way to proceed for today. That doesn't exclude future interventions to that regard. And my final word before we actually get into the presentation is that we are actively seeking responses to this document and to the presentation today, which we are hoping to be able to include in some format of the revived journal New Perspectives, either in the journal itself, if it's an academic response, or on our blog, or through organising further roundtables. So do feel there is a possibility to reply, a possibility to come back. That is what we are trying to actively encourage today. So, without further ado, I will hand over to Irina for the presentation of the IMEMO report.
Thank you, Ben. Well, first of all, I would really, I'm happy to express my gratitude, really deep gratitude, to Benjamin, who agreed to publish the text and who is doing a tremendous, huge work with the abbreviated version and with the English and other things. Secondly, the Institute, and in particular Vladimir Handel, who is now, he's our old friend, he's now in Germany, but we initiated, discussion whether this is possible or not with him a month and a half ago. So really, I'm very much thankful. Why here? Why an English version? This is for the first time, because in fact the forecast, this is the 13th, not a good number, but we started it with Russia and the World 2003, and each year it is published. It is finished just on the eve of the new year. It is published and then it is presented On the old New Year, we have such a fest as well in Russia. This is 13th January, and it is presented at the club which is called Mercury, and the head of this club is former Prime Minister Primakov, who really is, well, presenting it. That doesn't mean he agrees completely or controls the process of preparing, but we do it for the 13th January and for his club. Well, why we decided it to do now in a shortened version, I really wanted to do it because my deep feeling is that we are now in a very difficult situation. I mean, Russia and the world, Russia and the West, and the first victim of this crisis is the lack of dialogue, including expert dialogue. And just to, I will give you one example. That was in July last year when IMEMO initiated the dialogue with Americans that was exclusively second track. Well, 5 experts from the Russian side, 5 experts from the American side with very good names, very well-known names. But that was second track, that was organized in Finland. Well, Finnish government hosted the group, and they worked out recommendations. Most of them were implemented in this Minsk agreements. How to settle the conflict, how well to reach the appeasement and to go further. For the second dialogue, which was initiated, well, IMEMO invited Americans in autumn. They said nothing for media. They are afraid, you know. This is true. You can find it in Russian newspapers. Even on the second track, which proved to be very much productive in such situations, when experts can really discuss difficult questions, be open and find common solutions, even on this level, there is a deficit of dialogue. So if there is this publication, I hope it will appear, and there is a discussion around it, I think we will reach our aim. There will be different voices, and I hope we may find the solutions for normalization of the situation, not only in Ukraine, but between Russia and the West. I want just to boast. IMEMO is the 32nd in Pennsylvania rating world think tank. So we really are very proud of ourselves. This is really the leading think tank in Russia, and we are 4th in Central Eastern Europe. This is multidisciplinary. It normally consists, this is very traditional. Part of it is economy, second part of it is foreign policy. When I showed the text to Benjamin and when Vladimir read it, he said it's a pity there is nothing about domestic sources of foreign policy. Traditionally, we don't do it because IMEMO is not, it is Institute of International Relations and World Economy. Normally, we do not do this research. But as that was, you know, and colleagues understand that, but it was, you know, called as a silence or as a mission. So maybe I will tell a couple of things about this. These omissions, which are not in the full text, which is on the website of IMEMO, and which will not be in the shortened English version. On the domestic sources, I'm not an expert. I'm an expert in foreign policy. But still, there is, as compared to the beginning of the 90s, where there were different groups of interests in Russia, you know, that was very, very dynamic process at that time. That was the process, the period when Russian new statehood was built. In fact, domestic factors have very little impact on the foreign policy domain. This is the fact of life. What goes in domestic, these are parallel, you know, practical. There is one thing which is true. The support for the president in his foreign policy is high. I will say even more regarding Ukrainian crisis and regarding Crimea. Well, crisis is one thing, but regarding Crimea, even intellectuals who knew from the very start what could be the consequences for Russian-Western relations, part of them said, as we say in Russia, we have a neologism, you know, Krym nash, Crimea is ours. And this is the fact of life. People support it. This is true. This is not propaganda. And of course, well, that gives strong support to the president in spite of a worsening economic situation. Boris will tell a couple of words, and it is in the shortened, it is here in the full report in Russian, and it will be in the shortened version as well. Well, the stagnation of Russian economy, the structural crisis, the need for reforms. The problem is that all these things coincided last year. The crisis which just, you know, happened, it was on the break of the crisis, of the stagnation Russian economy. But as it came together with the fall of the oil prices and together with sanctions, of course the effect on the economy is very, very, very serious and negative. Again, if we look for the way out, there is one. There are many, you know, strategies, many reasons. The fact is, well, everyone knows what to do, but nobody does. I strongly suggest if you have a command of Russian to read the speech of Primakov at this Mercury Club. It was on the 3rd, so it is. You can find it, the full text. I think from the 14th January. His whole speech, about 45 minutes, was about the need for federal budget process, which is rather comprehensive thing. Well, to reform Russian economy, well, you need to have something, you know, a trigger, something that will have this domino effect. If you do something, then the next thing will be, and the third, and then it follows. This budget federalism is something that may really cause a very positive effect, the structural reform in Russian regions, the reform of the budget system in the sense that the regions will have part of the budget guaranteed for them for construction, for social needs. Of course, it includes political reform. In 1999, that means 16 years ago, working for American East-West Institute in Moscow, I gathered a team. I'm not an economist, but we published a book on budget federalism. I didn't bring it with me, but believe it, it was there. It is 16 years, the idea. Some of the authors became ministers or deputy ministers. Everyone knows what to do. The problem is to start doing it. On Ukraine, just to to finish with this question, I regard Ukrainian crisis, the civil war, as the well, there are three parts to be blamed. This is Ukraine, Ukrainian elite, Ukrainian government. Second, this is European Union. And third, this is Russia. Because Russia was rather silent, though straightforward, just saying that the reaction will be as it was to the signing of the association with the EU, explaining why. The European Union, the Brussels, well, let's say Brussels, because the position, and it is also in the report, it will be the shortened version, that there are differences, and we understand them among the members of the EU. It was complete irresponsibility. It was a complete neglect of the facts, lack of knowledge of what's going on in Ukraine. What will be the cost of this association? Social, economic, and financial. What we see now, to keep Ukraine just afloat, not to make it a failed state. Well, Russian reaction was as it was, starting from Crimea after Olympic Games. And then with the East, there is one thing which I want to stress. As in contrast to 2008, Russia supported elections in Luhansk and Donetsk, self-proclaimed republics. Russia did not recognize these elections, and that means that Russia is for the settlement of the situation in Ukraine. There are many signs that Moscow would be ready for the settlement. But one part of the forecast, and it will be in the shortened version, is about geopolitics, because we are living in very strange times with this strange mixture of very, very old formats, coming from the Middle Ages, as Parakhan said, this is a new Middle Ages, this is feudalism. What we see it in Ukraine as well, in all these, private armies and feudal conflicts. And this is the mixture, of course, of the new formats of conflicts, threats, challenges. But the problem of the last 10 years is that the real tsars or game makers of this geopolitics, global geopolitics, became small or even failing states like Ukraine, playing on the difference, contradictions of interests between big real players. And so in this sense, we all are victims. This is why Ukrainian civil war became the global matter. And final thing that maybe I will say about the causes of the crisis, well, it could be in fact predicted. Something of that sort had to happen, because during this last quarter of a century, it was the period of exactly silences or omissions, when something was not said, either by Russia or the West, or it was said and it was not done. In Russia, in the 90s, really weak, then, became stronger, felt cheated all the time. And that is that could be one of the, because I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a psychologist, that may be one of the reasons of that huge support of the population, and not only population, but even intellectuals, to this Crimea is ours. Well, maybe I'll stop here. It's enough. I think, I was quite provocative. And Boris maybe will add some economic things.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Very few addition. It's well known that to forecast is a difficult thing, particularly to forecast the future. And in the current situation, it's even more difficult because the political, especially geopolitical factor, became more influential than economical factor sensu stricto. And if we take the situation in Russia, we can characterize it by the so-called Gaidar law, which was formulated by one of our humorist writer. The higher are prices, the higher are the oil prices, the more lazy is government. But now government works without holidays, without, it seems to me, weekends, and produced current anti-crisis plan, which should take Russia from this new, seriously bad economic situation. The detailed version of this plan should be fixed by March this year, and the approximate cost of this first step, it's about 2.3 trillion rubles. It's about $35 billion. This is the first steps. The measures which should be quickly, sharply, and take Russia from this crisis hole. And after that, the government should produce, at last produced, the program of the reform, of systemic reform, which can bring Russia to the new model of economic growth. About this transformation of model we talk about maybe 10 years or something like that. It's more seriously after the crisis 2008, but now it's a real time. It seems to me maybe this, like some of our economists, the last chance to do it, because it's no sense and practically no reforms is a good time. Reforms realized in the bad time. No another way out of this situation. As for starting point for this current anti-crisis program and the systemic change, Russia have not bad position. I quoted some figures for information. Last year, foreign trade surplus Russia, it's about it's $186 billion. Even in the context of growing net capital outflows from Russia, the current account surplus is about $40 billion, and gold and foreign exchange reserves, even after declining currently, it's about 386 billions. It's enough to finance, if there are no any other incomes in our budget, it's enough for paying out of financing the Russian imports for about 15 months period. Normally it's okay if you have the reserves for 3 months, and it's enough, for example, to cover 65% of the total Russia foreign debt, state, commercial, banks, and other. Into national sovereign funds, it's about a little more than $150 billion. So the starting position in Russia is not bad, but problem is to realize these prerequisites for these anti-crisis measures and systemic transformation in the economic system. And as for the moods in the Russian business, is not very bad too. In January, Gaidar Institute had a poll about among the Russian industrial companies, and approximately 56% of the respondents told that the demand for their products is normal. So they basically think economic possibilities they really are, but realizing of these possibilities, and it's not now determined yet. So this situation is very risky. But if a government do real agreement with business, and business will be engaged in the developing and realizing of this program, the next renewing of the economic growth in Russia is quite real from 2017. As the polls for Russians, usual Russian citizens, 30% think that for coming out from this crisis and renewing the economic growth, Russia will need about 4 years. And 25% think that the 2 years will be enough. So the moods in the society is not bad as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes,
I'm
please.
sorry.
Yep.
There is plenty about China here, about the United States and EU in connection with Russian foreign policy. So these questions also, you may ask them.
Yes, I was just actually going to draw together some of the themes that are also in the English language version of the report that were not covered in the presentations. You can clearly see there's already a lot to talk about there, lots of questions, so be sharpening your pencils and ready to pose those to our two distinguished guests today. One of the key elements of the geopolitical section of the English language report talks about the question of whether or not there is a new Cold War. This clearly is a significant question. It's been on the lips of many, notably commentators such as Edward Lucas, who has made a successful relaunch of his book on the basis of continuing to beat this particular drum. However, the IMEMO analysis suggests something different. It suggests 4 key differences between the situation in the Cold War years and now, which leads IMEMO experts to conclude that actually there is not a new Cold War. The point that Irina was making about the New World Order, the fact our systems of international governance and international institutions have not kept pace with developments on the ground. We lack sufficient institutional capacity and perhaps sufficient imaginary capacity at the moment to deal with what could potentially on one side be a neo-medievalism or a neo-feudalism, while at the same time dealing with hyper-advanced technological developments that can also potentially provide game-changing technologies to different actors than previously, creating potentially asymmetric power relations. Whether they're asymmetrically used by the state or by non-state actors is a very different question. In terms of regional relationships, one of the key comments that stands out in the English language version of the report is the claim of the death of the European neighbourhood policy. Now, this is clearly a bold and fairly controversial claim. However, it rather echoes the analyses of Western analysts such as Andrew Wilson and Mark Leonard of the ECFR, who published talking about the failure of ENP and the fact it needs to be replaced with something else. Slightly different choice of terms. Think whether it's actually meaning something different. In assigning 3 parts of blame to Ukraine, to Russia, to the EU, there's an inverse point of one of the points that Timothy Snyder was making at Charles University on Tuesday this week, when he talked about the Ukraine crisis as being a war from which everyone loses apart from China. They are the only single beneficiary of this. So it's imperative for those of us who are seen to be on the losing side of that to try and find some productive solutions. And this kind of dialogue, we hope, is exactly what will lead forward to that. In thinking of your responses both now and potentially in written form or in podcast form that we are happy to, as I say, facilitate a platform for, we might also think there are very different perspectives from which we can view these issues, economically, but also from an international relations standpoint. Clearly, international relations that focuses on outside-in version of the world is one way of looking. However, we have other perspectives that would very much connect the domestic to the international in a variety of different ways. So once having read the report, you may wish to actually engage with it on those bases as well. What I think we should do now is proceed to take your questions. I propose that we take rounds of 3 questions. Please, if you can raise your hand if you have a question, and then when we actually come to your questions, please state your name and your affiliation before you actually ask it. Also, it would be useful if you direct your questions, perhaps more economic questions to Boris and more foreign policy questions to Irina. So please, if you have questions, raise your hands now. Okay, we have one here, and do we have any more for the time being? Yeah, okay, there's one there. And one more question for initial round? Yes, okay, so please, we'll go first here, then there, and then over there.
My name is Robert Nikolaievich. I'm the student of the International Relations in Prague University. I would have 3 questions. First, to Mrs. Kominskaya. You mentioned that in the Ukrainian crisis, mainly Ukraine, EU, and Russia are to blame. What do you think about the American role of the United States? I would like you to elaborate a bit more and share your thoughts. Second question, also you would be what do you think about the state's self-determination? What do you think about Ukraine joining NATO one day, which Russia and Mr. Putin is so much opposing? And the last question would be to Mr. Funkin. When you're mentioning about this crisis hold, don't you think if Russia would be more involved in trying to resolve the conflict in the Ukraine, it would make life easier and it would help the economical problems more than trying to tackle this problem only internally? This would be my question.
Thank you very much. Very concise on quite complex issues, so a model we should try and emulate there. Thank you very much indeed. We'll take the second and then the third question to give our panelists also some time to formulate their responses, and then we shall give those responses. So please.
My name is Karel Kužel. I am retired and my background is technical data communication. And my question concerns the position of the middle class in Russia, whether there are small and medium entrepreneurs, whether they are supported or whether they are facing big obstacles, and whether the Russian economy relies on them.
Thank you very much. Okay. Yes, and final question for this round.
My name is Denis Žernov. I study politology in Charles University. And I would ask some people, some specialists in Russia, for example, Sergei Glaziev, criticize economic policy of Russian government, especially monetarism and some independent tendencies of Russian economic policy. How do you think, how strong and influential these criticisms are?
Thank you very much. Okay, so I suggest we actually can take the first group of questions first. And so Irina, I pass the floor to you first, and then we'll come to Boris.
Well, regarding the US role in the Ukrainian crisis, I mentioned in fact three actors. US always is always there, United States, the ideology, other things, of course, after the change of power, I'm not saying regime. Regime, unfortunately, and political system did not change in Ukraine. This is one of the biggest problems. Maidan, the revolution, didn't change the system. The US is leading in the anti-Russian campaign, sanctions, and I'm sure that the European Union won't be that detrimental. I don't know how to put it in goodwill. I mean, the problems that sanctions create for European Union are huge. These are not only the problems for Russia. Of course, for Russia they are worse. So the European Union could be more moderate in their reaction to Ukraine. Still, yes, US is the engine of democratization, of liberalization. The fruits of these processes we see in the Middle East, and I think this is one of the biggest problems with American leadership. The United States understand the problem. They try to change to the smart leadership with less involvement, less engagement, but still, well, we don't know how Syria and Iraq will finish this year, with Obama not to be re-elected and be more bold and so on. Still, I think if this is not the European Union with insistence on signing the agreement on association between the EU and, again, Brussels, between the EU and Ukraine, it would be, I think these are the main actors at that time and that place. Of course, US always behind. Regarding self-determination, this is, really a difficult problem. This is the problem for Russia itself. new identity, new looking for this new basis for a new statehood, nation building. This is the problem, in fact, of all the post-Soviet countries, and sometimes even post-socialist countries. It was a problem for some states in the Central Eastern Europe who were in the socialist camp. But this is one thing. Yes, there was not enough political correctness on the part of officials in Moscow, who sometimes forgot that this is, an independent country. But just this time, I think that Moscow was very much careful about wording, politically correct wording, on the eve of the war. It was absolutely recognized and admitted that this is a sovereign country with its own problems, with its own, even with its own history. But speaking about self-determination, well, there are experts in Russia who, from the very start of the collapse of the Soviet Union and Ukrainian independence, started to write, to debate on the topic that Ukraine is artificial, unit, and sometime it will collapse into East, South, and West. The West obviously will go to Galicia, to this part of Europe, and with the West and the Central part. So, yes, Ukraine has a short history. This is less than a century old. But at the same time, it has own heroes, it has its own literature and culture, it has its own language, which is true, Ukrainian. And from my point of view, this is not that much the problem of self-determination which caused the conflict. The conflict was caused by really the problems of the regime of Yanukovych, who went too far in his corruption and all these things, and abuse of power. And it came from beneath, this is true. Because this protest, the Maidan, it started these were grassroots. But of course there are the people in Ukrainian polity. There are oligarchs who used and now used in a full scale this conflict for their own benefits and their own interests. Quite selfish. That is why I say, well, the regime unfortunately did not change, and we still, well, the part of these reforms, yes, money could be given to Ukraine. Boris, well, that was the next question we'll answer. Well, Russia may close their eyes, yes, Russia may give gas as it did this winter. But Russia cannot settle the problems inside the country. These are their own country problems. This is their own business. Regarding middle class, well, Russia is not the country of small entrepreneurs, unfortunately. There is no tradition of small business in Russia, as it was during socialist times in Poland, say. When it came to socialist Poland, there were small, enterprise with just one person, individual, who did some, and that was, this is the culture. Russia, unfortunately, is not. If we see the figures, that was done on the basis of the demand of the population. So 30% could be could be defined as a middle class before the crisis. But this is mostly to the consumption, what could they afford, to the level of the life. But that doesn't mean that, well, the basis of this middle class are mostly managers, just those working well-to-do, but not entrepreneurs, unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. I think just before we pass over to Boris to handle also his take on small and medium-sized enterprises and on the role of monetarism, and perhaps we could even broaden that to neoliberalism slightly more as part of the general critique of ways of managing political economy. It's worth noting that anyone who was at the Timothy Snyder talk on Tuesday will note that we have to reject this idea of a basic blinkered divide between Russian opinion and Western opinion, because many of these points are exactly echoing what Timothy Snyder had to say. So this is not a case of ideological division, but actually about picking through the reasons, picking through the scholarship involved in each case. It's analysis, exactly. So I think that's something important to note.
Thank you for comparison.
Pleasure.
For the first question, the fundamental problems of Russian economy are of internal nature. So the resolution of this problem should be based on the internal resources and internal economic policy and systemic changes. Of course, the inflow of foreign capitals and other technological, financial, and trade assistance to Russian economic growth at the changing.
Mostly credits.
Yes, it's very important. But if we, for example, saw to the experience of the previous crisis of 2008. Russia have no problems with Ukraine. Russia have no sanctions connected with Ukraine. But capital, foreign capital, and not especially hurry in Russia. Even the situation was not so geopolitically deformed like today. So of course it's external factor is very important, but it's not so fundamental like internal. We should resolve these things inside Russia, and with assistance, without assistance. Foreign assistance is not only assistance from West. It is assistance from Asia, from China, from other BRICS partners, and so on. As for the problem of middle class, as Irina told, the problem of Russia, of current Russia, well, that our middle class is predominantly connected with government in different forms, and the share of self-owned persons within this middle class are not very high. So the problem is to activate people for this small and middle business activity. And one of the main proposition in the package of the reform, which was discussed, was a deregulation package to maybe not throwing totally, but easing the tax and administrative and bureaucratic burden of this small and medium business. But even if this package should be introduced within this year, the result of it, maybe it's 2 years or something like that, there is a sudden, so quick result we cannot expect of this. But the problem is the changing of the nature of the Russian middle class, from the connected predominantly to the state to the sustainable made it. As for the Mr. Glaziev position, of course, Mr. Glaziev is very well known, authoritative in the Russian elite, but the mainstream of our government still is, and I hope to be, this guider type. So market, monetary or less monetary, maybe more Keynesian or something like that, but not the recommendation, not according to the main recommendation of Mr. Glaziev for this mobilization of economy, isolation, and so in the current modern global world, even under the condition of sanction war between Russia and West, it's not good and cannot guarantee the change of model of the development of Russian economy.
Okay. Also, sorry,
yes,
I just, if you read Russian, On the website of IMEMO, there is a book. We published it, a short one, in November on the consequences of the Ukrainian crisis for Russian economy. It is mainly economic things with the calculations of IMEMO experts, which drastically differ from what Glaziev said, that, well, the consequences will be dramatic for, no. We say, yes, there may be problems. I mean, the consequences of the association of Ukraine with the EU. The point is that, well, we think that these two integration formats, the Eurasian and European Union, they are, at a certain moment, they can be compatible. So that's the point. You can see it.
This actually leads exactly to something I was just going to mention. So we're ready to take new questions, but I have one thing to throw for our guests to be bearing in mind with relation to the proposal that was initially advanced in an ECFR report last year and was raised by Sigmar Gabriel and Angela Merkel at Davos about the possibility of a potential EU-Russia free trade agreement or an EU-Eurasian Union free trade agreement, conditional upon the initial halting of hostilities in Ukraine, the finding of a sustainable solution, and naturally the meeting of certain conditions on both sides to find a mutually acceptable way. It would be interesting to have our guests' views on A, is this possible, and B, what would be the processes that would need to take place in order for this to happen. So perhaps think about that. Then this idea also of Vandal durch Handel, the change through trade, suggests different models of international relations, which are talked about in the report, alongside more realist tendencies there are talk about liberal interconnectedness. In relation to what Boris Frumkin was saying a second ago, there are also very interesting sections in the English-language report on the difficulties of import substitution in the Russian economy because of the way it's structured, the particular vulnerability to sanctions that is taking place, but also something that comprehensively rejects any of the rather conspiracy theory type notions that the world oil price is being rigged as an attack on Russia. So there's interesting thinking on that to dig around as well. Okay, can I ask for more comments and questions from the audience, please? So we have one there. We have any more? Yes, okay, we have another one there. Death of the neighbourhood policy? Provokes some thought from some of the EU-connected people in the room, perhaps? Can have a question on that. Okay, let's take these two for now. So first of all, please, and remotely introduce yourselves as well.
So, good afternoon. My name is Vitas. I'm a trainee at the Embassy of Lithuania and also a student of international relations in Germany. And although I don't want to focus on the Ukrainian crisis as you asked, but I think it's quite necessary to make just some short comments about that. So firstly, I think it's necessary to stress out that we should not be talking about civil war in Ukraine, because it is, in my opinion, a war between Ukraine and Russia, which invaded another country and broke the fundamental principles of international law. Secondly, I think it's interesting, this idea that three parts are to blame, and of course, as Mrs. Irina told, firstly, Yanukovych regime is to blame because of the corruption and further details. But the statement, but the idea to blame the EU reminds me of the article of a quite famous scholar in the US, Mersheimer. He wrote an article called, I don't know the exact name, it's just that why West is fault or something, you know, maybe you're familiar with that exactly. So I think this article and this idea that Ukraine is just a part or just detail between these great powers is wrong, firstly because Ukraine should have the ability to decide upon its own future, and we shouldn't forget that Russian soldiers are in the Ukraine nowadays, not European Unions, and the association agreement is a legal framework and nothing which could be invoked by aggression. So the broader question, maybe you could comment on that, regarding foreign policy and the political order in Russia is, well, many scholars said even in Russia that, you know, Russia is managed democracy. This idea was especially expressed after 2002 and then later during Putin's rule. Today, another scholar, Professor Motil, wrote an article saying that it's not a managed democracy, so not the mix between democracy and autocracy nowadays, but it's fascistoid Russia, which is a mix of autocracy and fascism. And I don't even want to talk about Vladimir Zhirinovsky's statement, but would you agree to this statement by the Professor Motil, or do you see these terms, managed democracy and fascistoid Russia, as not, showing the reality?
Thank you very much. Yes, many competing uses of the term fascist at the moment being thrown around in relation to this conflict. Okay, we'll take the second question and then come to our guests for a response. So, please.
I'd like to know something about migration from Chinese into Russia, especially into Siberia. Whether it is considered threat or opportunity or even hope, I don't know. Because they are very active in business, they should create some base for enterprising, which is necessary in Russia.
Yes, so to help create a Russian Mittelstand.
Yes.
Yes.
Some business spirit.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I think two really interesting questions there that raise very different sides of the issues that we're talking about. So, who would like to respond first?
Well,
Irina?
I'm going to start with the war between Russia and Ukraine. This is not civil war. This is domestic war. When there are different, militarized units controlled by different people of the same nationality and citizenship. This is domestic war. With their own interests and the consequences. One of the problems with these hostilities, I would say, between Russia and Ukraine is that Russia does not admit to be the part of the conflict. And this is one of the problems with the settlement of the conflict. Russia does not admit, Russia would not admit. Regarding all this, soldiers and other things, I haven't been there. And I don't believe anybody, including Russia. The fact that there are former Soviet arms, this, how you call them, but they are tanks or other things. I don't know the right word. The whole world.
Armored personnel carriers.
Armored carriers.
The whole world goes to war with Kalashnikov. That doesn't mean that Russia is in war. Well, the whole post-Soviet space has the same arms. The Central Europe as well. So this is not an argument. But I again say I'm not going into discussion. I'm not a military analyst. There are some very few people who are sensible in the analyzing the situation. But I don't believe anybody. Russia does not admit this is part of it. She is the part of the conflict. But Russia takes part in the negotiations for the settlement. My feeling is that Kremlin now, Moscow now, is aiming to the settlement of the conflict. I want to answer this question, but I very well understand your position, your argumentation. I may agree, I may disagree, but this is not the matter on the table today. Sorry. Regarding calling Russia fascistoid, I'm sorry. Really, we may call France fascistoid in the same way. We may call the United States fascistoid in Libya in the same way, whoever, or in Iraq. I think, this is not politically correct. The use of the word fascistoid defining the geopolitical forces in Ukraine, neither, from my point, is correct, you know. But this is the word which is in the air and very much in, you know, in fashion today, which unfortunately is very, very dangerous side. And this is true, because the level of extremism, of xenophobia, you know, in Europe, not only in Europe, is very high. But the roots of it are very, very complicated. Well, migration in China, you know, it is not that much now the discussion as it was in the 90s, when it was really, you know, important point, matter discussed by the experts. Well, China migration is not on the wide scale first. It is mostly the workers who come to work in the Far East and go back. In Vladivostok, well, in these areas. Well, Russian women like to be married to Chinese, but they prefer to go there. So this is not the problem of security. Also, if in the analysis of our experts on the region, and in particular in China, you will find that, well, traditionally and in future, because, well, Chinese as compared to Russia or Europe, well, they really think for ages, for, you know, for a longer term. They are oriented to the east. They are oriented to the east and to the south, southeast, to their region, to Asian Pacific, and well, they have no ideas of you know, invading Siberia. Even if it is, because really it is depopulized. Well, there is very, very little population. This is one of the biggest problems in Russian economy, because this is huge reservoir. But unfortunately, well, there are very few people who work there. But the Chinese won't go there. The other thing is that there are investments. Well, this is business in Russia. So yes, they are very active, as they are everywhere in the world.
Thank you. Boris, would you like to add?
There's a little addition to this Chinese immigration problem. The estimates are that approximately 10 million people from Central Asia, from Ukraine, from Moldova, from Georgia, and I mean this from the post-Soviet space, and from other countries, including China. It's about 10 millions currently. And in these 10 millions immigrants, more or less stable, functioning in Russia, like Irina said, the share of Chinese is rather negligible, because now they have no systematic strategy of immigration to Russia, and especially with this Siberia and Far East. Mostly, it's maybe looks strange, but mostly the Chinese are most active in the south of Russia, in Stavropolsky Krai, in Krasnodarsky Krai. They take
in Ukraine, by the way.
But Ukraine is not Russia.
Yeah, but I mean in the south. I mean.
Thank you for the clarification. I think a very valuable one at this stage.
Yes, and they're very active in agriculture and in this greenhouse production, and there are some doubts about the quality of their products and technologies or something like that, but they prefer the south, more warm region, not the so severe climatic regions like Siberia and Far East. Maybe in future, within the program of attracting the foreign investors to the Far East, not only Chinese, but from South Korea, from Japan, even from Singapore, maybe they should be more active. But now they prefer live from the other side of Amur River, and only temporary works in Russia. in perspective, long-term perspective, if we will be realized the now discussed huge program, for example, high-speed railway from Beijing to Moscow, something like that, the huge number of Chinese engineers and workers came to Russia, but temporary, and then came back. In the mid-term perspective, maybe it's the perspective of 10, 20 years, something like that, is no problem of the mass immigration of Chinese, especially to this Siberian region.
Thank you very much indeed. I think perhaps just a couple of points, drawing a couple of things together, then we'll go out for another round of questions and comments. Clearly there is, and this again relates to things that Timothy Snyder was saying on Tuesday. People who were there will be familiar with it. You can actually find the whole video of his talk now up online on YouTube, covering a lot of these events. The point about I don't believe anyone is exactly about part of what Professor Snyder identified as part of the Russian political technology, that is to throw enough chaff into the air so as to distract and corrode our ability to believe in anything, which he identifies as a particular issue. So it's interesting that you particularly mentioned that. An interesting point that he made is that one thing that can transcend propaganda of all sorts is death, is individual death. The death of 19-year-old soldiers who can no longer go home to their mothers. And we know that Russian soldiers' mothers organisations have in the past been powerful, are forming again, and are starting to also attract the attention of the state. This is something that time will tell, and so then we may find out there would be evidence of the Russian regular army fighting on the territory of Ukraine, despite what is claimed by different sides. So this is perhaps something for a more longer-term perspective. Indeed, the issue of blaming the West from Mearsheimer, it smacks of bringing a prepared framework to analyse a situation without consideration for the people on the ground. Others are very guilty of it as well. Edward Lucas is guilty of the same thing. The world is like this, I apply it to the situation, I get out exactly the conclusion I expected to. Emmanuel Wallerstein from the neo-Marxist left, similar thing. You read any of these analyses, they seem to bring a map to Ukraine which ignores Ukraine and Ukrainians. So it's something quite interesting to consider there about which frameworks we do actually bring in to analyse these things and how they might be compatible. As we've mentioned, in some ways your analysis and Timothy Snyder's analysis very compatible, in other ways totally opposed. So on which assumptions are these based? How do we actually get to the bottom of that, as well as to analyse the particular points that come out of them? Right, okay, so do we have more comments and questions, please? I think there's still quite a good mileage to cover. Yes, okay, we have one there. Is that a general...
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. More comments, questions? Why is there not going to be a new Cold War? Perhaps it would be good to hear something more about that. I would be interested to hear you talk more about that. And again, what could be potentially the international architectures that could give us a better system? Because this is mentioned in the report that actually we lack these things. We have high technology but not political technology of another kind to actually manage our current international affairs properly, and perhaps some comments from the audience on that would be good as well. And also if the audience have any comments on this idea of the free trade agreement, particularly the idea, would the Baltic states support this? Would this be a betrayal in light of current events? Are they likely to stand in the way of any progress towards this? Or is it in the interest of everyone to transform the conflict and transform relations? Okay, so we'll proceed with the question, and can you introduce yourself, please?
Can I just add one last thing to what you just mentioned about the Cold War? The Gorbachev...
if you can, if it's directly related.
Very quick, that Gorbachev recently made a comment that it could be a hot war instead of the Cold War, just to...
Absolutely, well, yes, that's the other potential indeed. So yes, think about that as well, if that provokes some more questions in you. Obviously, for some people, the war is already hot, and it depends on what scale we're talking. Please. Thank you.
I'm Robert Colson from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Thank you for the wonderful presentation, very interesting. First of all, I would like to hear the speakers respond to your question about the free trade agreement and the relations between the European Union and the customs regulation. That would be very interesting. I actually have two questions, and they're both about international organizations as well. I'm interested to find out if your report has any prognosis about the effectiveness or role of the OSCE. And Russia has been challenging it quite a bit, I think, especially in terms of election monitoring, human rights monitoring, things like that. Is the OSCE a viable organization Does it need to be reformed? How can it work? Will it work? And my other question is about the CIS. Russia has consistently blocked discussion, Ukrainian and Moldovan suggestions to discuss the Ukrainian crisis in the framework of the CIS. I'm wondering why Russia has done that, and whether it's a sign that the CIS itself is also a non-functioning organization.
Super, thank you very much indeed. Right, so who would like to go first? Boris, perhaps you would like to say something on the free trade agreement potential, and then Irina as well, and then we'll go to those specific questions about OSCE and CIS.
I should tell that Russia always put forward the proposition of the contact between the different integration forms of the post-Soviet area with the European Union. But before it was only CIS, the US, as you know, completely reject the contact. No official contact between the institutional structure of CIS and the European Union. Practically like before it was Comecon and the European Economic Community. But now, when Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan realized the custom unions mostly on the model of economic, partly institutional model of the European Union, and the many questions of import duty, capital moving, labor market, and technical certification standards are now realizing within the Eurasian Economic Commission, so subnational institute like Europe, more or less like European Commission. So this institutionally and economically now it's more easier to make this contact, and with the development of the Eurasian Economic Union from the January this year, it seems to me that this prerequisite, the base and legislative base, institutional and economical impetus of this development are more, even in this difficult political situation, it seems to me it's more comfortable and more practically became the decision in some form integrate this to these economical systems. And it seems to me that within this, under the umbrella of this inter-community agreement, it can be solved some problems which now exist with the association agreement between Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia with European Union. All these problems, all this Russian and not only Russian but Belarusian and Kazakhstan, in some degree problems connected with this association can be, it seems to me, practically resolved under the umbrella of these contacts. Moreover, the Kazakhstan have prepared new agreement with the European Union. And this agreement is again instrument for the easing of these contacts. And they really step to this one economically space from La Manche to Vladivostok or something like that. Because now there are two partners and two really functioning integration communities. Of course, the Eurasian Economical Community is too young and not so coherent. Not only coherent, but so progressive and so developed. But now is a platform for these things, and under this on this platform resolved and some other problems. As from the OSCE, it's even better. As from the CIS, The CIS is a very wide framework, political, economical, and Russia, even within this new Eurasian Economical Union, don't throw out the CIS agreement systems. For example, the free trade zone within the CIS, Russia don't reject it, don't throw it out, even with the, after the custom unions were functioning for this late years. And Russia, it seems to me, don't plan do it because some countries of CIS, the CIS is like a platform for resolving some problems. Maybe it will be useful in future. Even if formally country is out of CIS, like Georgia, for example, practically the all economic agreements, in fact, are functioning even the country is formally out. As for Ukraine, Ukraine was in fact co-founder of the CIS, but never signed the general agreements of the thing. No, formally, Ukraine has no
status or
обязательства.
Obligation.
Obligation. Formally, Ukraine should not have any obligation within CIS, but in fact, you realize the free trade agreement of on the trade movement or something like that. So
one of the first steps of the new government was that they leave the CIS, but in a week they decided that they better stay.
Rethink this.
Yes, it was in some.
So it seems to me it's not so CIS is like organization, like a system is not so important like it was before, like it's a system of peaceful divorce of the post-Soviet states, but it can use like a useful instrument in future as well.
Thank you very much, Irina.
Well, in fact, I agree. Well, maybe I can only add that just stress once more that customs union and Eurasian Economic Union were elaborated with the system of standards and norms to be compatible with the European Union. So, these two formats are compatible in case there is a political will on both sides and many other prerequisites, of course. Regarding the CIS, yes, I agree, it's more a roof now, but it is still, useful for coordinating the positions or clarifying them, as well as clarifying the contradictions. With the OSCE, this is an interesting question because, in fact, that for many years, Russia was very much pessimistic about the OSCE, and not only Russia, but it is regarded by many experts now in Russia that exactly the Ukrainian process gives a chance for reanimation of many old formats, like NATO, which it did already, which we saw in the summit during the summit in Wales, for OSCE that can be really useful with its monitoring missions. If really this is. It is on the earth, it is in the field, it can be very, very much useful in the case of peacekeeping, peacemaking, in case, again, if they have the special mandate which they need for being there for the operation, to be legitimate and safe at the same time. Regarding this Cold War, these were happy.
Just before we move on.
Yes, please. Thank you.
I didn't hear an answer for why Russia has blocked discussion of the Ukraine crisis in CIS. Moldova and Ukraine both feel that that's an appropriate forum for discussing it, and Russia has rejected it. I'm just curious why that would be.
Thank you
It
for
seems to me
restating.
logical that they do.
I haven't heard about, well, blocking the discussion, but there is one thing which is in this report, and it is in the shortened version of our forecast. It is absolutely definite that the Ukrainian crisis has aggravated the situation in the post-Soviet space and has put new problems, political, mostly political, and economic insecurity for further Eurasian integration. This is true. This is true. Because we have very reserved position of the Kazakhstan, very sometimes reserved position of Belarus, but Belarus has its own, specifics. But anyway, the Ukrainian crisis for now and in the foreseeable future will hamper the integration in the post-Soviet space. Well, this is contrary to the Russian dreams, ideas, plans, strategies.
So just to clarify on that, you're saying Russia's not blocking discussion in the CIS. It's a reserved position, but it's not a
I
formal
know
block.
that they did. I spoke to the foreign minister of Moldova personally in April, and she told me that she had just come back from Minsk, where she tried to push that discussion, and Russia shut it down. And she told me that Ukraine had done so earlier as well. And Russia, again, had refused to discuss it both in the political and the economic forums of the CIS. But I'm also interested in, did Russia discuss the problems that Russia foresaw with the association agreements between Moldova and Georgia and Ukraine within the format of the CIS with those countries at the time, much earlier, before the crisis began? I'm interested in, does Russia see the CIS as a viable way of settling disputes or discussing disputes within the region of the CIS?
Well, the question of associations of these three countries with the European Union, this is one thing. The other is the settlement of the crisis. And the third thing is the discussion of that in the CIS. My feeling is that, well, exactly as Boris says, well, CIS is rather a loose format and is used when it is useful. Where it is better to use customs union, the customs union is used. Well, the Eurasian Economic Union. We also have the security, well, the CSTO, the cooperation, the organization of CSTO. The organization for security, collective security. Yeah, that's it. Which is another format which is very much useful in Central Asia.
Well, again,
no one else can do it.
I don't want to monopolize, but you say that the CIS is a format that's used when it is useful, and clearly Moldova and Ukraine both felt that it could have been potentially useful in this crisis, and Russia didn't. And so I'm trying to get at why the CIS can't be used when it's useful to Ukraine. Is it only used when it's useful for Russia?
This is their choice. They wanted to leave and they did not.
No. It's the first thing that Russia don't block any discussion with the CIS. It's impossible technically. And it's because it's the organization of the independent states, more or less connected with Russia, more or less friendly to Russia, but they discuss it and fix the agenda mutually together. So Russia cannot block the discussion. So there is no subject for this discussion if the discussion are not continuous or profound or something like that. Why Ukraine doesn't leave this area is completely clear, because Ukraine need maybe not normal but more or less normal trade and economic regime and relation with Russia. Now in this situation and with other countries as well, but mostly with Russia. So Ukraine economically, maybe not politically, but economically cannot afford to reject these rules, this good trade regime which is within the
Privileged, in
free
fact.
trade area
Privileged.
of the CIS. Of course, against there is some embargo of Russia against some products from Moldova and Ukraine. But for example, Georgia, which leaves the CIS with politically continuous conflicting with Russia almost this point, have now normal economic and trade relation with Russia. It seems to me that the Georgian export to Russia last year practically doubled. And Ukraine against this decreased by 25 or 27% or something like that. And all of this within the free trade regime within the CIS. So it depends of the country behavior, of the country policy. Not the CIS is completely useless. It's useful. That's why Ukraine don't leave the CIS formally, and Georgia leave it formally, but in fact keep along all these trade agreements, which will be not only trade agreements, but the agreements of the trade migration, of the transfer of payments of this migration from Russia to Georgia, from Russia to Moldova, from Russia to Ukraine. And for the Ukraine, maybe it's not so important source of money like for Moldova and Georgia, but it's a very important thing even for the Western Europe, Western Ukraine, who normally are not very like Russia, but the people from the Western Ukraine work in Russia as well.
Yes, indeed they do. Okay, just to draw. Thank you very much for a very interesting line of questioning. What that combined with the previous comments brings to my mind in talking about international organisations, institutions, architectures, and so on, is the very clear distinction between form and substance. The format is there, the form is there, and it's the same for CIS and OSCE in this case. Why, when we have an existing format that could work, is it not used? Why is it then politically useful to revive it? The same question pertains to both organisations, and I say that having worked for OSCE in the past, it was very much an organisation in search of a mission. The other point that regards form and substance is, while the form of the Eurasian Economic Union, may well have been designed to be compatible with the European Union, in principle, we see from the difficulties that were existing on the immediate inception of it at the Belarusian-Russian border, where there were still customs officers, trucks were still being inspected and so on. Form is nothing without substance, and that is the big difference between the European Union's free trade area and the area of freedom, security and justice and the current Eurasian Economic Union. Without compatibility on substance and indeed spirit, I find it hard to believe there will be a productive cooperation based on form only. And it's about them finding that must be the crucial element, I would say. All right, we have still some few minutes left, so I would ask, are there any more questions people would like to ask, just so I have an idea of how much more time we need to give to that? Okay, you would have one. Anyone else who would have further comments, questions, and so on? Okay, in that case, what is the subject of your question?
The last topic you just mentioned.
Okay.
And I've also seen, for example, the president of the Belarus when he went to Ukraine, and he was saying that anything you need, you can count on us in Ukraine. So basically, I see slightly a change of wording, for example, from the Belarus side. So I would like to also hear from the experts what you think is happening in, let's say, Belarus, Russia, and relations, if there is any crack in it.
Okay, excellent. I would ask you to address that directly, and then we'll end on, I think, what should be a slightly more positive note, which is the main reasons why the experts from IMEMO do not think there is a new Cold War likely to happen, and probably for the same reasons, not a new hot war either. So please, if you could first of all address this point about Russia-Belarus relations, and then we talk about...
Well, about European Economic Union, the Eurasian Economic, well, that is one more argument for Putin being a European leader, European person. You know, if something works effectively, well, he wants to copy it on the post-Soviet space. Whether it works or not, this is another thing. But it is envisaged to be compatible with the European Union standards and norms. Well, the other thing is that, well, every member tries to use it in its own selfish interests, which is, again, normal. Regarding Russian-Belarusian relations, there is nothing new in this wording of Lukashenko going to Kiev, talking to Poroshenko and saying something else in Minsk, something else in Moscow in his talks with Putin. Belarus, as it is in our even shortened version, I think, of the reform, has gained a lot from this situation of sanctions, and Lukashenko being extremely pragmatic, if not cynical, leader, and he is cynical. Tries to take everything he can from the situation, including illegal trade, half legal, great trade, using this practically transparent borders, saying what he knows perfectly his partner would like to hear. What Poroshenko wants to hear, what Putin likes to hear. That doesn't mean that he's eternal. No, he's not. But the regime is as it is. So this is exactly what I said in the very beginning, and here I come to the point about Cold War. But I said that this is geopolitical. This is great game, or how you called it, this period. This is great game with not great players. This is great game played by small actors with parochial interests, which makes Europe in particular insecure. Because, when Lukashenko or Yanukovych or whoever of the same caliber goes to the leader in Moscow or in Europe and tries to convert his interests into the interests of European Union or Russian interests, that makes the situation extremely insecure globally. Well, why not Cold War? Cold War were, happy times. Really, because of I will mention one simple reason. That was the time when there was the mutual assured destruction. The threat of using nuclear weapons worked on both sides. There was one really dramatic moment during the Cuba missile crisis. After that, everyone was very much happy. And there were the rules of the games to which the United States kept and Russia, Soviet Union. And it was exactly that time when the whole process of arms control and reduction started, when the main treaties in the sphere were signed. That was the world with the rules. The world we have now is the world without rules. Another dramatic difference is that, that was the bipolar world, two systems. The world we have in the 90s was unipolar. That was, the US leadership. What we have now is at least, we have a very, very important player. And I really suggest reading this full version of the report, and it will be in the report called Russia and the World. At least 10% is dedicated to China, because this is, the big player, the third nuclear power in the world, with unknown nuclear arsenals, because they are not transparent. In the system, and this is mutual interest of the United States and Russia to make China more transparent in this sphere. Well, and with its own strategy, and if the United States is, well, Sergei Rogov, you heard the name, he's the academician, the director of the US and Canada Institute, where I started my work in the academy. He said that the United States is властелин двух колец, is the, as in this tale.
Master of rings.
Yeah, master of two rings, you know, well, Russia, well, transatlantic and trans-Pacific. Russia is also trying to combine integration formats. Russia is not very much successful in it now, but still, well, it wants to, it is there in the text, to strengthen this non-Western formats. One in the BRICS, well, which is very, very diverse. On the one hand, yes, this is non-Western, but that can be the only uniting feature because China has its own interests. There are problems between China and India, and so on and so forth. And, well, Russia wants also to, and this is logical, to combine this integration format with the integration in the Central Asia and post-Soviet Union, post-Soviet space, because, well, with China is really the player in Central Asia, in this region. Well, for both the United States and for Russia, the problem, the question, the challenge, for now, the challenge of China is clear. This is another thing that Europe, from my point of view, does not understand the challenge of China still. And this is the economic challenge, this is the security challenge, this challenge, whatever. So these are not happy times. Well, they are hardly predictable. Meanwhile, the Cold War was, from that point of view, very much the game was
a world of certainty and predictability to a certain extent. Yes.
The game with the rules.
And I think it's very important not to read too much into the comment. These are happy times from a realist international relations point of view and being able to predict behaviour. That's what is meant by that. Clearly, there are many other frameworks that look at exactly the people for whom this was distinctly unhappy times, particularly people such as where in the country we're sitting in right now. So this was not what you meant, and so I would hate for you to be sort of misinterpreted on that. So yes, and this is a point John Mearsheimer has made in the past as well. His famous article in 1990, even when he's called it Back to the Future. He said, "What is the best way to make Europe safe?" Well, obviously to give Germany nuclear weapons. This is in the moment of hope, right after the end of the Cold War. Mearsheimer is saying this. Why? Because you again create a predictable balance of power. And so this is what he's saying now, is the rules have changed. And we do have other frameworks of international relations theory for understanding deeper complexity, for understanding the effects of the inside of countries on the outside, for understanding complex issues of identity, of language, of different interactions between actors and so on, that we can also draw on. And so if any of you are thinking of responding to this from either a policy or an academic point of view, which again I would strongly encourage you to do, please do bear in mind there are other ways of seeing these issues. I think we'll draw things to a close, but before we do, just a couple of public service announcements. I hope they're public service. The Centre for European Security, as you know, is a new innovation at the Institute of International Relations. We have a new publication series as well called the European Security Spotlight. The first 3 of those are available on our website and deal with issues ranging, this was published in December and dealt with the elections in Moldova, with the Visegrad 4 policy on migration, and also with the EU's involvement in Lebanon. The next 3 installments of this nascent series are going to be coming out soon, and we'll cover the Syriza victory in the elections in Greece and the connections to Russia, looking perhaps, I think some of you have seen this week the pictures of Dugin, the Russian philosopher, who's been called worse than a philosopher as well, meeting with the Syriza leadership. There are increasingly clear links between Russia and Syriza, so what are the security implications of that? But also the final one is going to be looking exactly at this possibility of a free trade deal as an incentive to conflict transformation, and what role Central European countries can play in that. And one thing this report also highlights is the differentiated positions of EU8 and EU2 countries towards Russia and towards Ukraine, which are extremely significant for understanding the potential for this deal to go forward. Thank you all very much indeed for coming today, for your fascinating questions and insights. I would also like you to thank our two speakers who have been very generous with their time and provided a fascinating insight into the plurality of thought that is actually going on inside Russia, which challenges several of the common misconceptions. So please join me in thanking Irina Kubrinskaya and Boris Frumkin for a fascinating presentation today, which we hope will indeed launch further dialogue. So thank you both.
You.